Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. Read by Anne-Lise Kadri. Chapter 21. The Parting. I had now lived in this happy place 3 years, but sad changes were about to come over us. We heard from time to time that our mistress was ill. The doctor was often at the house, and the master looked grave and anxious. Then we heard that she must leave her home at once and go to a warm country for 2 or 3 years. The news fell upon the household like the tolling of a death bell. Everybody was sorry, but the master began directly to make arrangements for breaking up his establishment and leaving England. We used to hear it talked about in our stable. Indeed, nothing else was talked about. John went about his work silent and sad, and Joe scarcely whistled. There was a great deal of coming and going. Ginger and I had full work. The first to go were Miss Jessie and Miss Flora with their governess. They came to bid us good-bye. They hugged poor Merrylegs like an old friend, and so indeed he was. Then we heard what had been arranged for us. Master had sold me and Ginger to his old friend, the Earl of Wessex, for he thought he should have a good place there. Merrylegs he'd given to the vicar, who was wanting a pony for Mrs. Blomfield, but it was on the condition that he should never be sold, and that when he was past work he should be shot and buried. Joe was engaged to take care of him and to help in the house, so I thought that Merrylegs was well off. John had the offer of several good places, but he said he should wait a little and look around. The evening before they left, the master came into the stable to give some directions and to give his horses the last pat. He seemed very low-spirited. I knew that by his voice. I believe we horses can tell more by the voice than many men can. "Have you decided what to do, John?" he said. "I find that you have not accepted any of those offers." "No, sir. I've made up my mind that if I could get a situation with some first-rate colt-breaker and horse-trainer, it would be the right thing for me. Many young animals are frightened and spoiled by wrong treatment, which need not be if the right man took them in hand. I always get on well with horses, and if I could help some of them to a fair start, I should feel as if I were doing some good. What do you think of it, sir?" "I don't know a man anywhere," said master, "that I should think so suitable for it as yourself. You understand horses, and somehow they understand you, and in time you might set up for yourself. I think you could not do better. If in any way I can help you, write to me. I shall speak to my agent in London and leave your character with him." He asked John about his future, and then thanked him for his long and faithful service, but that was too much for John. "Pray don't, sir, I can't bear it. You and my dear mistress have done so much for me I could never repay it. But we shall never forget you, sir, and please God we may some day see mistress back again, like herself. We must keep up hope, sir." Master gave John his hand, but he did not speak, and they both left the stable. The last sad day had come. The footman and the heavy luggage had gone off the day before, and there was only master and mistress and her maid left. Ginger and I brought the carriage up to the hall door for the last time. The servants brought out cushions and rugs and many other things, and when all were arranged, master came down the steps carrying the mistress in his arms. I was on the side next to the house and could see all that went on. He placed her carefully in the carriage, while the house servants stood round crying. "Good-bye again," he said as he got in. "We shall not forget any of you. Drive on, John." Joe jumped up, and we trotted through the park and through the village, where the people were standing at their doors to have a last look and to say God bless them. When we reached the railway station, I think mistress walked from the carriage to the waiting room. I heard her say in her own sweet voice, "Good-bye, John. God bless you." I felt the rein twitch, but John made no answer. Perhaps he could not speak. As soon as Joe had taken the things out of the carriage, John called him to stand by the horses while he went on the platform. Poor Joe. He stood close up to our heads to hide his tears. Very soon the train came puffing into the station. 2 or 3 minutes after the doors were slammed to, the guard whistled, and the train glided away, leaving behind it only clouds of white steam and some very heavy hearts. When it was quite out of sight, John came back. "We shall never see her again," he said. "Never." He took the reins, mounted the box, and drove slowly home with Joe. But it was not our home now. Chapter 22. Earl's Hall. The next morning after breakfast, Joe put Merrylegs into the mistress's low chaise to take him to the vicarage. He came first and said goodbye to us, and Merrylegs neighed to us from the yard. Then John put the saddle on Ginger and the leading rein on me and rode us across the country about 15 miles to Earl's Hall Park, where the Earl of Wessex lived. Here was a very fine house and a great deal of stabling. We went into the yard through a stone gateway, and John asked for Mr. York. It was some time before he came. He was a fine-looking, middle-aged man, and his voice said at once that he expected to be obeyed. He was very friendly and polite to John, and after giving us a slight look, he called a groom to take us to our boxes and invited John to take some refreshment. We were taken to a light, airy stable and placed in boxes adjoining each other, where we were rubbed down and fed. In about half an hour, John and Mr. York, who was to be our new coachman, came in to see us. "Now, Mr. Manley," he said after carefully looking at us both, "I can see no fault in these horses, but we all know that horses as well as men have their peculiarities, and that sometimes they need different treatment. I should like to know if there's anything particular in either of these that you would like to mention." "Well," said John, "I don't believe there is a better pair of horses in the country, and right grieved I am to part with them, but they are not alike. The black one has the most perfect temper I ever knew. I suppose he's never known a hard word or a blow since he was foaled, and all his pleasure seems to be what you wish to do. But the chestnut, I fancy, must have had bad treatment. We heard as much from the dealer. She came to us snappish and suspicious, but when she found what sort of a place ours was, it all went off by degrees. For 3 years I have never seen the smallest sign of temper, and if she is well treated, there is not a better or more willing animal than she is. But she is naturally of a more irritable constitution than the black horse. Flies tease her more, anything wrong in the harness frets her more, and if she were ill-used or unfairly treated, she would not be unlikely to give tit for tat. You know that many high-mettled horses will do so." "Of course," said York, "I quite understand. But you know it is not easy in stable like these to have all the grooms just what they should be. I do my best, and there I must leave it. I'll remember what you have said about the mare." They were going out of the stable when John stopped and said, "I'd better mention that we have never used the bearing rein with either of them. The black horse never had one on, and the dealer said it was the gag bit that spoiled the other's temper." "Well," said York, "if they come here, they must wear the bearing rein. I prefer a loose rein myself, and his lordship is always very reasonable about horses, but my lady, that's another matter. She will have style, and if her carriage horses were not reined up tight, she wouldn't look at them. I always stand out against the gag bit, and shall do so, but the rein must be tight up when my lady rides." "I am sorry for it, very sorry," said John, "but I must go now or I shall lose the train." He came round to each of us to pat and speak to us for the last time. His voice sounded very sad. I held my face close to him, as that was all I could do to say goodbye, and then he was gone, and I have never seen him since. The next day Lord Wessex came to look at us. He seemed pleased with our appearance. "I have great confidence in these horses," he said, "from the character my friend Mr. Gordon has given me of them. Of course, they're not a match in colour, but my idea is that they will do very well for the carriage whilst we are in the country. Before we go to London I must try to match Baron. The black horse, I believe, is perfect for riding." York then told him what John had said about us. "Well," said he, "you must keep an eye to the mare, and put the bearing rein easy. I dare say they will do very well with a little humouring at first. I'll mention it to her ladyship." In the afternoon we were harnessed and put in the carriage, and as the stable clock struck 3, we were led round to the front of the house. It was all very grand, and the house 3 or 4 times as large as the old one at Birtwick, but not half so pleasant, if a horse may have an opinion. 2 footmen dressed in drab livery, with scarlet breeches and white stockings, were standing ready. Presently we heard the rustling sound of silk as my lady came down the flight of stone steps. She stepped round to look at us. She was a tall, proud-looking woman, and did not seem pleased about something, but she said nothing and got into the carriage. This was my first time of wearing a bearing rein, and I must say, though it certainly was a nuisance not to be able to get my head down now and then, it did not pull my head higher than I was accustomed to carry it. I felt anxious about Ginger, but she seemed to be quiet and content. The next day at 3 o'clock we were again at the door, and the footmen were there as before. We heard the silk dress rustle as the lady came down the steps, and in an imperious voice she said, "York, you must put those horses' heads higher. They are not fit to be seen." York got down and said very respectfully, "I beg your pardon, my lady, but these horses have not been reined up for 3 years, and my lord said it would be safer to bring them into it by degrees. But if your ladyship pleases, I can take them up a little more." "Do so," she said. York came round to our heads and shortened the rein 1 hole, I think. Every little makes a difference, be it for better or worse, and that day we had a steep hill to go up. Then I began to understand what I had heard. Of course I wanted to put my head forward and take the carriage up with a will, as we had been used to. But no, I now had to pull with my head up, and that took all the spirit out of me and brought the strain on my back and legs. When he came in, Ginger said, "Now you see what it is like. But this is not bad, and if it does not get much worse than this, I shall say nothing about it, for we are very well treated here. But if they strain me up tight, why, let 'em look out. I can't bear it, and I won't." Day by day, hole by hole, our bearing reins were shortened, and instead of looking forward with pleasure to having my harness put on as I used to, I began to dread it. Ginger, too, seemed restless, though she said very little. At last I thought the worst was over. For several days there had been no more shortening, and I determined to make the best of it and to do my duty, though now going out was a constant harass instead of a pleasure. But the worst was not come.